Good afternoon. My name is Kendall Bedford, and this is debate 3 in relations to the pharmaceutical companies that the federal government might or might not want to regulate. Let's go ahead and get started, shall we? So, as I stand on this position, I do believe that the federal government should regulate pharmaceutical companies, especially when it comes to cost and relations. I have worked in the health industry for over 8 years, and I can tell you that there has been family deaths, family catastrophic spendings that accumulate because of the money that they had to pay for pharmaceuticals. One of the main focuses I want to focus on today is more so of the pricing. When you look at the different federal government programs such as the Center for Medicaid and Medicare, they're usually hit with a big financial burden paying for these different prescription drugs, especially if they're specialty medications. For example, antiretroviral drugs used to treat STDs such as HIV have a pretty high cost burden, especially if there's no one that has insurance that will help cover that, or if they're financially not feasible to cover those types of drugs. With that being said, this financial burden comes back, of course, to the patient, and then, of course, if they're using some form of government insurance such as the ACA or Medicaid or Medicare, it can cause a serious financial burden, which can put them in the donut hole, which means that they will be paying a true out-of-pocket expense, in which case most of them can't afford that. It's an expensive type of a drug, probably more than most people house notes. So a couple of reasons to back that up would be along the lines of the fact that, one, when it comes to pharmaceuticals, these companies are obviously private sectors, which means that they invest in time, they invest in research to put these drugs out there for a good humanity cost, but for the same token, is lining out somebody's pockets. Physicians in particularly are the ones that have to determine what kind of drug that their patient would take. For an example, when you go to a doctor's office, of course, your insurance company is billed. And then, of course, when it comes to the prescription drug itself, depending on what tier level it is, from tier 1 to tier 4, will determine if you have a copay or if you don't have a copay. Now, with that being said, the physician also plays a role in this. They actually have to order the drug, which means the office has to pay for this drug. And therefore, the doctors usually hope to get reimbursed in this case, in which they should, especially if they know that this in particular treatment will work best for that patient. Of course, checking toxicity levels, stewardship involved in this. We want to make sure that the doctors are given the best treatment possible for their patients, and evidence that if the treatment is working, they can reduce the combination of that drug or the drug entirely and probably take them down to something cheaper or not so name brand. Another thing that we have to also consider is when we put a price on drugs, and particularly those that are of specialty quality, we are seriously talking about the difference between a person that's going to be healthy and live, and their disease goes into remission, or are they at the next stage where it could be terminal. So the amount of money that we spend on drugs just alone could, one, help accumulate either morbidity or mortality rates. And what I mean by that is, if pharmaceutical companies charge so much to where patients and insurance companies can't really afford them, then we can definitely see an increase in mortality rates and deaths, and most likely that's going to be along your top 10, like heart disease, cancer, etc., etc. So that is something that we should also look into. That would probably be a pushing point for the federal government to regulate cost for pharmaceutical companies. Another thing you also want to consider too is the fact that research is another thing. So FDA generally is on top of their game when it comes to pharmaceuticals. In most cases, drugs that are put out on the market are usually FDA approved. That means they went through several different trials, from where you have randomized control studies to group studies, testing out the treatment to see if there's any side effects, long-term side effects, projections, etc., etc. frankly, if the federal government were able to put initiatives out there, or incentives, if I can use that word, I think personally what it would do is it would probably allow these pharmaceutical companies to probably branch on to the federal government, instead of them just going on working for themselves. They can work for the federal government with these incentives. What I believe that will do is help reduce the cost for these drugs, including research and development of these drugs, advancement of these drugs, and then of course advertising it. A couple of years ago, Hillary Clinton, I know she did propose a legislation that could possibly help reduce the burden of pharmaceutical drugs, especially for those specialty drugs. Not sure if that got passed, but her concept was built around that kind of foundation, using the government to put incentives out there, initiatives to put research jobs and different incentives to help lower the cost burden for those drugs. All in all, I do think that it would be a very good approach. It would be very shaky, but of course, where there's error, you can fix. But indefinitely, it would have benefits to reduce pharmaceutical costs, and it can help lessen the burden financially for, of course, the average consumer, insurance companies, doctor's office, Medicaid, Medicare, people who are on ACA insurances, or even private insurance companies. So it's just something to really consider, something to think about, and hopefully that would be a light bulb in this administration that we have today. Good luck with that, to push for that and evidence that it has its benefits in the long run. So that is my conclusion. I hope you guys enjoy. Have a good day.